My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been head of security operations at Denver International Airport for 22 years. Before that, I did 8 years with TSA at 3 different major hubs and another 6 in private security at corporate facilities across the Southwest. I've seen everything you can imagine in airport security: smuggling attempts, mental health crises, elaborate theft rings, even a few legitimate threats that never made the news because we handled them quietly and professionally. I tell you this so you understand that I'm not someone who jumps to conclusions or sees conspiracy in every shadow. I deal in facts, in footage, in documented incidents. Before I tell you what I found in the archived security recordings from Concourse B, before I explain why 3 members of my team requested immediate transfers and why I've started keeping a go bag in my office, I need you to understand something very clearly. If you're planning to fly through Denver, if you have a layover scheduled in the next few months, pay attention to what I'm about to tell you. Subscribe and like this video, because what I'm sharing goes against every non-disclosure agreement I signed, every protocol I've sworn to uphold. But after what happened on November 3rd, after we lost contact with an entire security team for 47 minutes in a section of the airport that officially doesn't exist, I can no longer stay silent. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Have you ever flown through Denver International Airport? Drop a comment below, especially if you've ever experienced something strange during a layover there. If you've ever felt like the terminal stretched longer than it should. If you've ever noticed that the clocks in different concourses don't quite match up. Denver International Airport covers 53 square miles, making it the largest airport by land area in the United States and the second largest in the world. Most passengers see the main terminal with its distinctive white-peaked roof designed to evoke the Rocky Mountains. The 6 concourses connected by an underground train system, the 16,000 feet of public corridor space. What they don't see is the infrastructure beneath. The airport sits on what was once Stapleton International Airport's outskirts. But the land before that has a history most people don't know. The site was purchased from several private owners in the late 1980s, but county records show gaps in the ownership chain going back to the 1950s. Large sections of the land were listed as owned by entities that dissolved decades ago, holding companies that trace back to military installations that operated here during the Cold War. There's a reason the conspiracies cling to this place like static electricity. The underground tunnels, the bizarre murals in the terminal, the runways that form a shape some say looks like a swastika from the air, the dedication capstone with Masonic symbols and references to the New World Airport Commission, an organization that doesn't appear to exist in any records. I used to dismiss all of it as the kind of mythology that grows around any large, mysterious structure. I used to think the people who showed up asking questions about secret bunkers and government facilities were just looking for patterns in chaos, seeing intention where there was only bureaucratic inefficiency and poor planning. I don't think that anymore. November 3rd, 2024 started as a routine Sunday night shift. Low traffic, mostly red eyes preparing for early Monday departures, and the usual overnight maintenance crews. I came in at 2200 hours for the overnight rotation. My team that night was smaller than usual because we'd given several officers the weekend off. Just 12 of us, covering an airport that can handle 100 million passengers a year. The night supervisor was a woman named Patricia Herrera, who'd been with airport security since DIA opened in 1995. She knew the place better than anyone, knew every service corridor, every maintenance tunnel, every camera blind spot. She was training two newer officers, both former military, both solid. Around 130 hours, Patricia radioed in about a technical issue with the camera feeds in Concourse B, Level 5. Now, officially, Concourse B only has 3 levels: ground floor arrivals, second floor departures, and a lower level for baggage handling and mechanical systems. But anyone who's worked here long enough knows there are access points that go deeper: service corridors for the underground train system, utility tunnels that predate the main construction, access shafts that were supposed to be sealed after the airport opened but never quite were. We refer to them by number internally. Level 4 is mostly HVAC and electrical. Level 5 is where things get complicated. Level 5 is technically a maintenance designation for sections of the tunnel system between concourses that require security clearance to access, the kind of clearance that comes from somewhere above airport administration, from federal agencies that don't return calls and contracts that get marked classified for reasons nobody explains. Patricia reported that cameras 47 through 53 in the B Concourse Level 5 section had started displaying corrupted footage, not offline, not showing static, but corrupted. She described it as looking like the image was folding in on itself, like watching a video that had been compressed wrong, so the pixels stretched and doubled. I pulled up the feed from my central office and saw what she meant immediately. Camera 49 showed the standard view of a concrete corridor with yellow safety lines painted on the floor and the usual pipes and conduit running along the ceiling, but the image kept stuttering. Not freezing, stuttering, like it was playing back at irregular intervals. A figure would appear in one frame, standing in the middle of the corridor. Then in the next frame, they'd be 20 feet further along. Then in the next frame, they'd be back at the start. I assumed it was a technical glitch, probably a bad cable or interference from the electrical systems down there. I told Patricia to log it for the maintenance team and avoid that section unless absolutely necessary. She acknowledged and said she was going to do a quick physical check of the cameras from the Level 4 access point, just to see if there was visible damage to the equipment. I told her to take one of the officers with her and keep the radio open. She said she was taking both of the newer officers because she wanted them to get familiar with the lower level access procedures. That was at 0147 hours. The last clear radio transmission I received from Patricia was at 0149 hours. She said they were entering the Level 4 access corridor and would be at the camera junction in about 5 minutes. Then there was silence. At first, it wasn't concerning. Radio communication gets spotty in the deeper tunnels because of all the concrete and metal infrastructure. We have repeaters installed, but there are still dead zones. At 0155 hours, I tried to raise Patricia on the radio. No response. I checked the GPS locators we all carry on our key cards. They showed Patricia and both officers as stationary in the Level 4 corridor, right where they should be. At 0203 hours, I tried again. Still nothing. The GPS tags hadn't moved. I checked the camera feeds for Level 4, but those cameras don't cover the full corridor system, just the main junction points. I couldn't see them on any of the working feeds. At 0210 hours, I called the Airport Operations Center and requested they try to raise Patricia's team on the emergency frequency. They reported back that they were getting carrier signal from the radios, but no voice transmission, like the radios were on, but nobody was speaking. At 0215 hours, I made the decision to send another team down. 2 officers, veterans who'd been here almost as long as Patricia. I told them to proceed to the last known position and establish radio contact. I told them not to go further than level 4 unless absolutely necessary, and to maintain communication with me every 2 minutes. They entered the access corridor at U221 hours. At U223 hours, they reported that they'd reached the junction point where Patricia's team should have been. Nobody was there. The GPS tag still showed Patricia and her team as present at that exact location, but there was nobody visible. One of the officers said something that I noted in my incident report, something that seemed odd at the time, but became significant later. He said the corridor felt longer than it should. He'd been down there dozens of times for inspections and routine checks, and he said the distance from the access door to the junction point felt like it had stretched. He said it took them almost twice as long to reach the junction as it normally did, even though they'd been walking at a normal pace. At 0227 hours, the team reported that they could see light coming from further down the corridor from the direction of the level 5 access. A blue-white light that flickered like fluorescent tubes having trouble starting. I told them to proceed carefully and keep the line open. At 0229 hours, I heard one of them say something in a tone I'd never heard from him before, a tone that made my hands go cold. He said, "The corridor's wrong, Marcus. It's not going straight anymore. It's curved, but we're not turning. The curve is happening around us." At 0230 hours, I lost contact with them. The radio went silent. The GPS tag showed both officers in the same position as Patricia's team, all 5 tags clustered in the same impossible location. I immediately contacted the airport director and requested emergency protocols. Within 10 minutes, I had Denver PD en route and the airport fire department on standby. The decision was made not to evacuate the terminal because there was no clear threat to passengers and we didn't want to cause panic. But I assembled every available security officer, pulled people from all concourses, and prepared to do a systematic search of the lower levels. At 0245 hours, we were staging at the level 4 access point when my radio crackled to life. It was Patricia's voice, but it sounded strange, flat, like she was reading from a script. She said, "Central, this is Herrera. We are securing the area. Multiple individuals present. They're not on the manifest. They're not on any manifest. Stand by for further information." I asked her to clarify her position and status. She responded, "We're where we've always been, Marcus. We're in the hours between. The missing hours. You need to see this. Send the footage to your personal drive before it gets archived. They're going to classify it. Once it enters the system, you'll never access it again." Camera 51. Timestamp 0148 to 0234. Watch what happens to the corridor. Watch what comes out of the wall. Then the radio went dead again. At 0316 hours, Patricia and all 4 officers walked out of the level 4 access corridor. They appeared calm, unhurried. Their uniforms were clean, their equipment in order. But something was wrong with them. Their movements were too synchronized, like they were walking in formation without meaning to, like their steps fell into rhythm without conscious thought. When I asked Patricia what had happened, where they'd been for 47 minutes, she looked at me with an expression I can't adequately describe. It wasn't blank, but it wasn't quite present either. She said, "We were doing our job, Marcus, just like we always do, just like we've been doing for longer than you know." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Some sections of the airport don't follow standard time. You know this. You've always known this. Check the footage. Then check the building plans from 1992, the original plans, not the ones they released to the public. Look at what they built in the lower levels before they brought in the oversight teams. Look at the contractor lists. Look at where the primary investors came from. Then look at what they found during the excavation, the old installation, the one from the 1950s, the one that was supposed to be demolished but wasn't. Then she and the other 4 officers walked away, filed their equipment, clocked out, and left the airport. None of them have returned to work since. All 5 have been placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending a medical evaluation that hasn't been scheduled yet. The official incident report states that they experienced disorientation due to carbon monoxide exposure from a faulty ventilation system in the lower levels, that they were never missing, but were simply out of radio range due to equipment malfunction, that the GPS anomaly was a software error. But I was there. I watched the timestamps. I know what 47 minutes means. I went back to my office and pulled the footage from camera 51, like Patricia had told me to. I copied it to my personal encrypted drive before entering it into the incident report system, before it could be flagged and archived under whatever classification system they use for things they don't want examined. What I saw in that footage is why I'm recording this now, why I'm violating federal security protocols and multiple NDAs, why I've accepted that my career in airport security is effectively over. The footage starts at 1:48 hours, right after Patricia reported the corrupted camera feeds. Camera 51 covers a section of the Level 5 corridor that's about 200 feet long, concrete walls painted industrial white, LED lighting strips every 15 feet, pipes and electrical conduit visible overhead. Standard underground facility corridor. For the first 3 minutes, nothing unusual happens. The corridor is empty. The timestamp advances normally. Then at 01:51 hours, the image begins to distort, but not like digital corruption. Like the space itself is distorting. The walls appear to ripple, not like they're moving, but like they're becoming less solid, less defined. The far end of the corridor seems to recede, stretching away into distance that shouldn't fit in the physical space of the airport. By 01:53 hours, the corridor looks twice as long as it should be. The lighting at the far end takes on that blue-white quality my officers had reported. And then figures start to appear, not walking into frame, appearing, manifesting in the middle of the corridor like they're stepping through a door that isn't there. The first figure is a man in clothing from the wrong era, a military uniform, but not modern military. Something from the 1950s, based on the cut and style. He stands in the middle of the corridor, looking around like he's confused, like he doesn't know where he is. His mouth moves like he's speaking, but there's no audio on the security feed. After about 30 seconds, he walks toward the camera, getting closer, and I can see his face clearly. He looks young, maybe mid-20s, and there's a badge or patch on his uniform that I can't quite read. He reaches the camera position and then simply vanishes, doesn't walk out of frame, vanishes mid-step. More figures appear over the next several minutes. A woman in 1970s style clothing, bell-bottom pants, and a long patterned shirt, carrying a small suitcase. She walks the corridor like she's looking for something, checking door numbers that aren't visible in the frame. 2 children in clothing that looks like early 1990s fashion, holding hands, walking together down the center of the corridor. They're crying. I can see it in their body language even without audio. A man in a business suit from what looks like the 1980s, talking on a cell phone the size of a brick, pacing back and forth in the same 10-foot section of corridor. None of them seem to see each other. They move through the same space, but don't interact, like they're existing in different layers of the same location. The timestamp continues to advance, but the time it shows starts to become inconsistent. It will read 0158.23, then jump to 0159.47, then back to 0158.31, then forward to 0201.15. The time is moving non-linearly, and throughout all of this, the corridor itself continues to change. The walls develop seams that weren't there before, patterns that look almost organic, like veins or root systems spreading through the concrete. The floor develops markings, symbols, characters that don't belong to any alphabet I recognize. At 0207 hours, by the camera's confused timestamp, something else appears in the corridor. Not a person. A door. It forms in the wall, not like it was always there, and I just didn't notice, but like it's growing out of the concrete. The outline appears first, then the frame, then the door itself, made of some dark metal with more of those strange symbols etched into its surface. The door stands closed for almost a minute while more figures continue to appear and disappear in the corridor around it. Then it opens. What comes through the door isn't something I can describe accurately, because my brain keeps trying to reinterpret what I saw into something that makes sense, something that fits into the categories of things that should exist. The best I can do is tell you that it was a figure, roughly human in proportion, but not in substance. It looked like it was made of the same strange patterns that had appeared on the walls, like someone had taken the symbols and assembled them into a form that could move and act with purpose. It walked down the corridor, and as it moved, the other figures, the people from different eras, turned to watch it. For the first time, they seemed aware of something else in that space with them. Some of them tried to approach the figure. Some of them backed away. The figure stopped in the middle of the corridor, directly in front of camera 51, and it turned to look at the camera. It looked at the camera like it knew it was there, like it could see through the lens to wherever the footage would eventually be watched. Then it raised what might have been a hand and placed it against the wall, against the concrete, and the wall rippled like water. The figure stepped through the wall and was gone. The door in the far wall closed, began to fade, and within 30 seconds, it had vanished completely. The corridor began to return to its normal proportions. The strange symbols on the floor and walls faded. The blue-white light dimmed back to normal LED illumination. The other figures, the people from different eras, started to disappear one by one, fading out like photographs left too long in sunlight. At 0217 hours, Patricia and her team appear in the corridor. They walk into frame from the level 4 access point, and they're moving with that synchronized rhythm I noticed later. They walk down the corridor, which is now back to its normal length, approximately 200 feet. They stop at various points and appear to be examining the walls, the floor, taking notes on tablets. They're calm, methodical, like they're documenting something routine. At 0229 hours, the second team I sent appears in frame behind them. Patricia turns to face them, speaks, though I can't hear what she's saying. Both teams stand in the corridor for about 2 minutes, apparently in conversation. Then all 5 officers turn and walk back toward the level 4 access point, moving in that strange, synchronized way. The footage continues for another few minutes, showing the empty corridor, now completely normal, looking exactly like it should. No distortions, no strange figures, No impossible doors. Just a standard concrete service tunnel deep beneath a major international airport. The timestamp has stabilized. Time is flowing normally again. At E0234 hours, the footage ends. That's what was recorded by camera 51 in the 46 minutes between when Patricia's team entered level 5 and when they emerged. I spent the next 2 days trying to understand what I'd seen. I did what Patricia told me to do. I pulled the original building plans for Denver International Airport from 1992, the ones filed with the city before construction began. They're public record, technically, though you have to know where to look, and you have to request them specifically. The plans show the standard concourse and terminal layout, the underground train system, the baggage handling infrastructure. But there are sections, particularly in the areas between concourses, that are marked simply as federal use, restricted access. No details on what those spaces contain, no architectural specifications, no contractor information. Just blank spaces in the plans where something is supposed to exist but isn't explained. I cross-referenced those sections with the current security designations we use, and they correspond exactly to what we call Level 5. The spaces that require federal clearance to access, the areas that get maintained by contractors who don't work for the airport authority, who answer to agencies that don't identify themselves clearly. I pulled contractor records from the construction period, 1989 to 1995. Most of the major construction companies are listed clearly, standard commercial builders and engineering firms. But there are several entities involved in the lower-level construction that are harder to trace. Shell companies with names like Mountain States Development Group and Cascade Infrastructure Systems that existed just long enough to complete their contracted work and then dissolved. Companies with addresses that lead to P.O. boxes or offices that closed decades ago. When I tried to trace the ownership of these companies, I found chains of holding companies and investment groups that eventually led to Department of Defense contract numbers and classified project designations. Then I did what Patricia suggested and looked into what was on the land before the airport was built. The official history says the site was mostly empty high plains, some ranch land, nothing significant. But property records tell a different story. Between 1951 and 1953, the federal government purchased nearly 5,000 acres in what is now the airport footprint through a series of discrete transactions. The land was designated for Civil Defense Research Facility 17, which doesn't appear in most declassified documents from that era. There are references to it in Department of Defense appropriations records, budget line items for construction and ongoing operations through the 1960s and into the early 1970s. Then the funding disappears from the public record. The facility officially closed in 1974, according to a brief mention in a GAO report. Closed and demolished. But when the airport site was excavated starting in 1989, construction reports mention unexpected structural encounters. Sections of existing underground construction that had to be integrated into the current design rather than removed due to structural complexity. That language appears in at least 6 separate contractor reports from 1990 and 1991. They found something down there. Something that was supposed to be gone, but wasn't. And instead of demolishing it, they built around it, incorporated it into the new airport infrastructure, created those unmarked spaces in the building plans, and classified them under federal jurisdiction. I found one more thing in my research, something that made my hands shake when I pulled up the document. There's a declassified memo from 1952, part of a civil defense archive that was released under FOIA request in 2003. The memo is from a military liaison to the Atomic Energy Commission, discussing temporal research facilities and dimensional stability protocols for installations being constructed around the country as part of classified Cold War defense programs. It mentions Facility 17 specifically, describes it as a primary research site for temporal boundary phenomena, and recommends increased security and expanded underground construction to isolate potential contamination events. The memo uses language that sounds like it's discussing radiation or biological hazards, but the technical terminology doesn't quite match. It talks about leakage between stable time periods, about entities manifesting from non-contiguous temporal locations, about barrier degradation requiring constant monitoring and maintenance. It reads like science fiction, like someone's creative writing project, except it's on official letterhead, with classification stamps and department codes sitting in a government archive. And it describes exactly what I saw on that security footage. I tried to talk to Patricia after I'd compiled all this information. I drove to her house 3 days after the incident. She answered the door, looking tired but calm. She invited me in, made coffee, acted perfectly normal. I asked her what happened in that corridor, what she and her team saw during those 47 minutes. She sat across from me at her kitchen table and said, "We did our job, Marcus. We secured the area. We documented the incident. We followed the protocols we were trained to follow." I said, I'd never trained anyone to follow protocols for what I saw in that footage, for impossible corridors and figures from different eras and doors that appear in solid walls. She smiled, and it was a sad smile, gentle. She said, "Not you, Marcus. The others. The ones who were here before the airport opened, before DIA was even proposed. The ones who've been maintaining the facility since the 1950s. They trained us. They've been training people for decades. Every airport, every major transit hub, every place where large numbers of people move through enclosed spaces across long distances. They all have teams like ours, people who know what to do when the boundaries get thin, when time starts to leak, when the old experiments start showing their effects. You just got to see it directly, because the system had a malfunction. The cameras weren't supposed to record that corridor. That section is supposed to be on a closed circuit that feeds directly to federal monitoring. Something broke down, probably during the event itself, and your standard security network picked up the feed. That's why I told you to copy it before it got archived. Once they realized the footage existed on your system, they would have locked it under classification so fast it would make your head spin. I asked her what the figure was, the one that came through the door, the one made of symbols and patterns. She looked out her window at the afternoon light and said, "It's what's left. What's left of the researchers from Facility 17. They were conducting experiments in the 1950s and 1960s, trying to understand time as a dimensional space you could navigate, trying to create technology that would let soldiers move through time the way we move through normal space." The theory was sound enough. Time isn't actually linear. It's more like a geography, all moments existing simultaneously in different locations in a dimension we can't normally perceive. They thought if they could map that geography, they could create doorways, routes, paths through time that would give us strategic advantage. They built Facility 17 underground, dug deep into the bedrock, installed massive electromagnetic equipment, particle accelerators, focused energy arrays. On August 15, 1962, they attempted a full-scale test. They tried to open a stable doorway that would let a person step through and emerge at a different point in time. Something went wrong. The doorway opened, but it didn't lead anywhere they intended. Instead, it created a rupture, a wound in the boundary between normal space and the temporal dimension. The researchers who were close to the test apparatus when it happened got caught in the rupture. They didn't die. They became something else, something that exists in multiple times simultaneously, something that can move through the temporal geography like we move through a building. The facility was locked down immediately. The military tried to close the rupture, tried to stabilize the boundary, but they couldn't. The wound stays open. It's been open for 72 years now. All they could do was contain it, monitor it, establish protocols. They built the airport here deliberately, Marcus. Not despite the old facility, but because of it. The airport serves a dual purpose. On the surface level, it's a transportation hub, one of the busiest in the country. But below, in those unmarked spaces, it's a containment facility. The constant movement of people, the electromagnetic fields from all the equipment, the way the underground train system is designed, it all serves to stabilize the rupture, to keep the boundary strong enough that the leakage stays minimal. The figures you saw in the footage, those people from different eras, they're manifestations from the temporal dimension. Echoes of people who passed through this location at different points in history, somehow caught in the geography around the rupture. Most of the time, they're harmless. They appear for a few seconds or minutes and then fade back into the timeline they came from. But sometimes, when the boundary gets particularly weak, the researchers come through. The ones who became something else in 1962. They're checking the integrity of the containment. They're making sure the wound doesn't expand. And people like Patricia and her team are here to assist them, to act as liaison between the facility's original purpose and its current operation. I asked her how long she'd known, how long she'd been working for them instead of for airport security. She said, since about 6 months after I started here in 1995. They recruit from inside, Marcus. They watch how people respond to the small anomalies, the little incidents that happen when the boundary fluctuates. If someone sees something strange and reports it properly, follows protocol, doesn't panic, doesn't create public issues, they get noticed. Eventually, someone from the federal team approaches them, explains the situation, offers training. Most people accept. The alternative is usually a transfer to a different facility, a reassignment that takes you far from Denver, with enough psychological evaluation and monitoring attached that you learn very quickly not to talk about what you saw. I accepted. I've been working both jobs for almost 30 years now. Regular airport security on the surface, containment protocols in the lower levels. The 4 officers with me that night, they were being evaluated. That's why I took them down there. The timing was coincidental with the event, or maybe not coincidental. Maybe the rupture knew we were bringing new candidates. It knows things like that, knows when people are paying attention, when consciousness is focused on it. Maybe it wanted to show them what they'd be working with. I asked her if she was still human, if what I saw in that corridor had changed her into something else. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was warm, solid, completely normal. She said, "I'm still me, Marcus. The transformation, the way we moved, that's temporary. It happens when you're close to a strong manifestation, when the temporal field is active. You start to sync with it, start to exist slightly outside normal time. It fades after a few hours. But yes, it changes you. Once you've been exposed directly, once you've seen the temporal dimension with your own eyes, you can never quite exist in normal time the same way again. You'll start to notice things. The way clocks in different parts of the airport don't quite match up, no matter how often they're synchronized. The way certain corridors feel longer or shorter, depending on what time of day you walk them. The way some passengers seem disoriented, like they can't remember which gate they came from, like the airport has rearranged itself while they weren't looking. That's all real, Marcus. That's all evidence of the containment system doing its job, bending space and time slightly to maintain the boundary. Most people never notice, but you will now. You've seen too much. I left Patricia's house understanding that my career was over, but not understanding what I was supposed to do with what I knew. I went back to work the next day and put in my request for retirement. Early retirement, walking away from the job 2 years before my pension fully vests. But I couldn't stay there. I couldn't walk through those terminals, knowing what's underneath them, knowing that every day thousands of people pass through a location that's designed to contain a wound in time itself, a rupture that's been leaking fragments of other eras into our present for 7 decades. The airport authority accepted my retirement request without question. They processed it faster than normal, actually, had my exit paperwork ready within a week. My replacement was already selected, someone transferring in from a TSA position at another major airport. Someone who probably already knows what they're really signing up for. Before I left, I made copies of everything I'd found. The building plans, the contractor records, the declassified memo about Facility 17, and most importantly, the security footage from Camera 51. I stored it all on encrypted drives in 3 separate locations. I'm releasing this now because I believe people have a right to know what's under Denver International Airport, what purpose it really serves, what's being contained there. But I'm also releasing it because I'm starting to experience what Patricia warned me about. The changes in perception. The way time feels less stable than it used to. 3 nights ago, I woke up at exactly 3:33 a.m. I was standing in my kitchen with no memory of getting out of bed. I was holding a cup of coffee that I didn't remember making. The coffee was cold. When I checked the kitchen clock, it read 3:33 a.m. When I checked my phone, it read 2:17 a.m. When I checked the microwave clock, it read 4:45 a.m. All 3 devices showing different times simultaneously. I stood there for what felt like 5 minutes, trying to understand what was happening. And when I looked at the clocks again, they all showed 3:33 a.m. Time had synchronized to that specific moment, like that moment was more real than the times around it. Yesterday, I was driving through Denver on I-70, just running errands, normal afternoon activities. I took the exit for Tower Road, the exit that leads to the airport. I don't know why I took it. I wasn't planning to go to the airport. I haven't been back there since my last day of work. But I took the exit anyway, and I drove toward the terminal. And as I got closer, I felt that same sensation Patricia's officers had described. Like the distance was wrong. Like the road was longer than it should be. I kept driving and driving, and the distinctive white-peaked roof of the terminal stayed the same distance away, never getting closer, no matter how far I traveled. I finally pulled over, stopped the car, sat there, trying to calm my breathing. When I looked at the odometer, I'd driven 47 miles since taking the exit. The exit ramp is less than 1 mile long. I was somehow 47 miles from where I'd started while remaining on a road segment that shouldn't extend more than a few thousand feet. I turned the car around and drove back, and this time the distance was normal. Within 2 minutes, I was back on I-70, like nothing had happened. The temporal geography is affecting me now. The exposure I had, watching that footage, learning what's really underneath the airport, it's created a connection. I'm starting to exist slightly outside normal time the way Patricia described. I can feel it happening, and I know what it means. Eventually they'll come for me. The federal teams. The ones who maintain the containment facility. The ones who've been doing this since the 1960s. They'll offer me the same choice they offered Patricia. Work with them. Help maintain the boundary. Become part of the system that keeps the rupture from expanding. Or accept reassignment, psychological evaluation, a life of monitored isolation somewhere far from Denver. I don't know which choice I'll make. But before they come, before I'm either recruited or removed, I'm putting this information out into the world. I'm showing you the evidence I found, explaining what I learned, warning you about what exists beneath one of the busiest airports in America. If you fly through Denver International Airport, if you have a layover between flights, if you find yourself walking through the underground corridors between concourses, pay attention. Notice if the distance feels wrong, if the corridors seem longer than they should be. Check your watch against other clocks you pass. See if the times match up. If you're waiting at a gate in Concourse B and you feel a strange urge to explore the terminal, to find a service corridor, to go deeper into the levels below the public spaces, resist that urge. The rupture calls to certain people, people whose consciousness is naturally sensitive to temporal anomalies. It wants witnesses. It wants people who can perceive what it is, who can serve as anchors between the normal world and the temporal dimension. Don't answer that call unless you're prepared to become something other than what you are. Unless you're ready to exist in multiple times simultaneously, to serve as a guardian for a wound in reality that's been bleeding for 72 years. Time isn't a line, it's a geography. All moments exist simultaneously in dimensions we can't normally perceive. What happened at Facility 17 in 1962 proved that. They opened a door into that geography, and they couldn't close it again. Now it stays open underneath Denver International Airport, contained but not sealed, monitored but not controlled, bleeding fragments of other eras into our present, while the researchers who became something else move through the temporal landscape, making sure the wound doesn't expand. The airport is the infrastructure that maintains the containment. The constant flow of people, the electromagnetic fields, the specific design of the underground systems, it all serves to stabilize the boundary between normal space and the temporal dimension. And there are people like Patricia working there, people who know the truth, who've been trained to respond when the boundary gets weak, when manifestations occur, when time starts to leak more aggressively than usual. I was supposed to be kept away from that truth. I was supposed to manage surface security and never know what was being secured in the levels below. But the system malfunctioned. The cameras recorded something they shouldn't have recorded, and I saw what I wasn't supposed to see. Now I'm part of it whether I want to be or not. The temporal geography has marked me, created a connection, pulled me partially into the space between moments. I can feel myself existing in multiple times now. Right now, as I record this, I'm here in my home office speaking these words. But I'm also standing in the level 5 corridor underneath Concourse B, watching the walls ripple and figures from different eras manifest around me. And I'm also walking through the ruins of Facility 17 as it existed in 1962, seeing the massive equipment arrays, the focused energy systems, the moment of rupture frozen in time. I exist in all these moments simultaneously. The more I think about what I learned, the more I exist outside normal time. This is what happens. This is what Patricia meant when she said, I could never quite exist in normal time the same way again. Welcome to Denver International Airport, the gateway to the Rockies, the largest airport by land area in the United States, the site of countless conspiracy theories about underground bunkers and secret facilities. Those theories are right and wrong simultaneously. There are no bunkers for the global elite, no headquarters for shadow governments, no alien technology or Illuminati meeting chambers. What's underneath Denver International Airport is somehow worse and more mundane. It's a wound in time itself, a rupture created by Cold War experiments that got out of control, a doorway into the temporal dimension that was opened and can't be fully closed. It's been there for 72 years, contained but active, bleeding pieces of other eras into our present, guarded by people who've been partially transformed by exposure to it, maintained by federal agencies that don't acknowledge its existence. And it's not the only one. Patricia told me that before I left. Every major transportation hub, every place where large numbers of people move through enclosed spaces across long distances, they all serve this dual purpose: surface transportation and temporal containment. The ruptures are everywhere, created by experiments conducted decades ago by governments around the world, all trying to weaponize time, all failing in slightly different ways, all creating wounds that had to be contained rather than healed. The modern infrastructure of global travel is built on top of this network of containment facilities, and nobody knows except the people who work there, the people who've been recruited or transformed, the people who exist partially outside normal time. I'm uploading this video with all the evidence I gathered, all the documents and footage and research, because you deserve to know what's under your feet when you rush through an airport terminal trying to make your connection. You deserve to know that the delays and the reroutes and the strange feelings of disorientation you sometimes experience in large airports aren't always just the stress of travel. Sometimes they're symptoms of temporal leakage, evidence that the containment system is struggling, signs that the boundary between normal space and the temporal dimension is thinner than it should be. Most of you will never notice. Most of you will fly through Denver or any other major hub dozens of times without ever perceiving anything unusual. But some of you will feel it. Some of you will stand in a corridor between gates and feel like the distance is wrong, like you've walked further than the space should allow. Some of you will check your watch and see time that doesn't match the clocks around you. Some of you will remember a gate number or concourse designation that doesn't exist, that never existed, that you somehow remember from a version of the airport that exists in a different timeline. If that happens, don't investigate. Don't go looking for answers in the lower levels. Don't ask airport security about the sections that aren't on public maps. Don't follow the strange impulse to find the service corridors and see what's deeper down. Just board your flight. Just continue with your travel. Just stay in normal time and normal space and normal reality. Leave the temporal geography to those of us who've already been marked by it, who exist in the hours between, who guard the wounds in time. I don't know how much longer I have before they come for me, before the federal teams arrive and make me choose between recruitment and removal. But I know the connection is getting stronger. I'm existing more in the temporal dimension and less in normal time with every day that passes. Soon, I'll be like Patricia and her team, moving with that synchronized rhythm, responding to manifestations with trained protocols, maintaining the containment system that keeps the rupture from expanding. Or I'll be removed, relocated, monitored, and isolated until I'm no longer a threat to the secrecy that's been maintained for 7 decades. Either way, I won't be the person recording this video anymore. I'll be something else. Something changed by knowledge, by exposure, by the simple act of seeing what I wasn't supposed to see. That footage from Camera 51 was never meant to be released. The incident on November 3rd was never meant to be discussed outside classified channels. I'm breaking every rule, violating every protocol, risking whatever freedom I have left. But the truth needs to be documented. People need to know what's being contained beneath their feet, what their tax dollars are funding without their knowledge, what price we're paying for experiments conducted in the 1950s and 1960s by governments that thought they could control time itself. The rupture stays open. The wound in reality keeps bleeding. And the infrastructure of modern travel is designed around containing it, around maintaining boundaries that should never have been breached in the first place. Time isn't a line, it's a geography, and we open doors into that geography that we can never fully close again.